Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartledge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. But we will get started on today's episode where we will be talking to one Laura VanArendonk Baugh. Laura is an animal trainer with many interests and an ongoing fascination with behaviour. She is a speaker at behaviour conferences, faculty for the Karen Pryor Academy, and a trainer and coach for her clients. She has trained or competed in a variety of dog sports in the past, from obedience to protection sports, and presently she is most focused on teaching others and writing books to make training more accessible. She is the author of Fired Up, Frantic and Freaked Out for Reactive Dogs, Social, Civil and Savvy on Best Practices for Socialization, and she's written a children's book about training mythical creatures, dragons, unicorns, chimeras, and clickers. You can find her training at caninesinaction.com or her books at lauravab.com. Summer will be getting one of those in her next Christmas stocking, I think. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Laura to the show today, who is very patiently waiting by. Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy.
Oh, absolutely. I am thrilled to be here.
And for everyone, this is our third attempt at starting today. The technical gremlins were not responding to their previously fluent station behaviour, and they were all over us this morning. So we actually had an interesting conversation. If you don't know, if you're like me, you didn't know what a chimera was, a mythical creature. I've learnt it's a Greek creature. It's got a lion's head.
Oh, now it's time for the quiz. No one told you there would be a quiz. Yeah, so a lion's head and body, and then a goat head coming out of the lion's shoulders, and then the lion's tail is a snake with a snake head at the end.
So it's like training one animal, but having to do group training as well.
Right.
But there's only one station.
I was going to say, at least the goat is already stationed, right? The snake has a little more movement. The goat's pretty stationary, so yeah.
Right. But you got like a target stick with 3 different targets on it.
Yes.
So then do you click once and they're all reinforced, or do they have different markers?
Well, that clearly would depend on your criteria. I mean, if we're going with the lion has to have paws on a platform or something, then, the snake's not going to be part of that. So do you need the snake to be doing an alternate behavior? So, it's about setting criteria like everything is.
Guess we'll have to read the book. Let's dive into our first question today, Laura. Could you take everyone back to where you first learned about training and then about positive reinforcement training and share some stories with us?
Yeah, so training goes way back. I was totally that animal nerd kid. Of what was, of course, as a young girl, I was into horses, as I think is required by law. But I did have the fantastic opportunity to ride, and I competed in horse shows and things. And then I started doing a little obedience training with my dogs. And everything that I was being taught at that time was very traditional training. And in fact, what I was learning in the dog training world was keeler training. And when I say that now, quite a lot of people say, "What is keeler training?" Which is joy to my heart. But it's a very traditional, very harsh. And even at the time with all the grown-ups in authority telling me, these were things that I wasn't really comfortable with, but that was the way, that was the only option I was given. And I didn't encounter positive reinforcement kinds of training until I was already a professional trainer. And so when I was introduced to that, it was just, oh, there are choices. Let me try this. And so I had a dog, freaking brilliant mixed breed dog named Chaucer. She's actually pictured in my Fired Up book. And Chaucer, started, she was a street rescue, but as we were going along, she was getting more and more, today we would say, reactive to other dogs. And of course, I did exactly what I had been trained. I put a choke chain on her, and when she lunged at another dog, I popped her. And curiously, the behavior that I was correcting kept getting worse. And of course, like 2021, Laura looks back and is like, well, obviously, but young and naive Laura didn't have the skill set or the knowledge set to understand why that was the case. And so when I was told about clicker training, the first thing that I did was like, oh, well, they say this fixes problems. Let me go click Chaucer out of aggressing at dogs. Well, of course, like this is young, stupid person with a brand new technology tackling one of the most challenging applications, right? Of course, this is just going to work. But it did. It really did. I just was like, oh, I didn't know enough to know how far I was reaching, right? So I was like, oh, they say click what you like. So I'm going to click her when she looks at other dogs and isn't barking. And somehow I got the timing right. And it started, I saw results like immediately. And well, that was it. Now I was reinforced. I'm in. And so that's where I've been since. So, yeah.
And how did you find, how long ago was this, and how did you find out about positive reinforcement? That would be right around the year 99 or 2000, I think. So yeah, we're reaching back a little bit. Get off my lawn. Yeah. And what was your book program person that introduced you to the clicker, or was it your own research?
So it started with, like I said, at the time I was already a professional trainer and I was training for a franchise. And then there was a group education event in that program. And they introduced, lure and reward training, which was something I had not seen before. It's not something that we had been doing. And then there was also clicker training that was just kind of barely touched on, but it existed. But that's where I went, lure and reward, like that was still new. That was pretty cool. But clicker training was magic. Like that's just crazy stuff over there. But it looked really fun, crazy stuff. And there was one person who in that group who was already clicker training at a much more advanced level than just hearing of it this week. And so she was able to show a little bit of how it worked. And so I actually ended up taking some agility classes with her. And she worked at a kennel club out of town, but I drove up to do some things with her. And then I just started reading absolutely everything I could get my hands on and going to see other trainers. And at the time, Melissa Alexander's Clicker Solutions email list was huge. I probably spent 80% of my waking hours sitting on Clicker Solutions reading everything. And there's probably a lot of really embarrassing material in those archives, actually. Like, how does this work? I can't even picture, like everybody who was a name in the early 2000s, I read them. I went to a workshop if at all possible. And just, sucked up information because I hadn't seen anything like this, and it was working, and it was pretty cool. And I had enough success with it early on that it was easy for me to say, yeah, I'm in all the way. This is great. So thank you, Chaucer. If Chaucer had not carried me through starting that incredibly optimistic project, then I probably wouldn't be exactly where I am.
And then how did this lead into your joining the KPA faculty? When they were first talking about the Karen Pryor Academy,
I actually went and I said, hey, this sounds really cool. And about that time, that was when they did the first, the Karen Plyer Clicker Training did the first Canis Film Festival, mispronunciation intended as pun, Canis Film Festival, and I won that with 2 videos my first year. So as Aaron Clayton said later, that kind of brought me to their attention as somebody who was mildly competent at least. And so I was asked about the KPA program when they were announcing that the Karen Pryor Academy would be opening. And they actually asked me to go ahead and enroll as a student, but with an eye to being faculty when I was through. And so that is what I did. And so I was in the very first ridiculously nerdcore group of people who went through the Karen Pryor Academy. It was great. So we would be at workshop and, they're like, okay, we're going to open the next unit. We're still writing the slides. It's going to be open in a couple of days. So it was very, very early on. And then when I graduated, then I became faculty and started teaching.
Wow, I did not know that. That's exciting. What did you win the competition for? The film competition? You said you submitted 2 videos?
They had, oh my gosh, I was not ready for this kind of memory dredging. So they had several different categories of video, and the 2 that I submitted was working a young dog through a nail trim process. And he came in as so let me just give the backstory on it because it's actually kind of funny. I wanted to do a video on teaching loose leash walking with a clicker, and I wanted to do a video on teaching nail trims with a clicker. And so I had a couple of clients that had young, eager dogs that I knew would be able to last through several rounds of video shooting, which was my primary concern. And so I asked them if I could, use their dogs for these shoots, here, free training sessions, just let me video them. And the owner of the terrier said, oh, great, this will be fantastic that you want to do nail trims on him because we just got thrown out of the grooming shop yesterday. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a really exciting video now. And so they were talking about having to wear leather gloves and the dog biting and all of these sorts of things. And so that is the dog that, and I video coded, I time coded the video so that you could see I think it's a 45-minute process, 45 minutes of training time that we get voluntary nail trims on that dog. And so that was actually a lot of fun. Those videos are both still on YouTube. If you look up Tucker Nail Trim, that's the one that was the biting dog that then was offering his paw for nail trims. And so that was a lot of fun, actually. Really good time.
Oh, that's awesome. Is that on your YouTube channel, is it?
It is, but I think it also exists a couple other places on YouTube. You know how videos sometimes float. But if you look for Tucker Nail Trim, it should come up on any of those.
You might find Sarah Owing's dog getting its nail trimmed as well.
Oh, darn it. Yeah. Well, this was before she had Tucker, so that's true. But it is on the... there was a Canis Film Festival channel that I don't know if that still exists, but it is also on my YouTube channel, which is Canines in Action or Laura VanArendonk Baugh, which is much harder to type.
So as you have informed us, you were there from the start of the KPA program. So that was 99, 2000-ish period as well? Was that a little bit later? No,
that was a little bit later. I want to say 2008, but I would really need to check my notes to feel comfortable on that. Probably 2008, maybe 2009, January-ish or something.
That's cool. I didn't know this, so this is exciting to me to learn that, and I'm curious to know as you've been involved with the program and seemingly its development over the time since its inauguration. What have been some of your favorite kind of moments being involved with KPA and Clicker Expo and developing that program?
Oh my gosh, it has been so much fun. So I love first of all, I just love working with the students. I just graduated a group of students this past weekend, so just a couple days ago, and all of them passed their assessments, and I was so proud of them. Yay! There's my little dance moment for a second. Sorry, but it's so much fun to be able to work with people and send out trainers that are going to, be able to address people and be able to teach them, in the right way and get really good results for both them and their animals. And I just love that. But it's been really fun, as KPA faculty and for such a period of time, because as you say, the program definitely has, developed and progressed. And we'll have a faculty meeting and, we're sitting around, we're like, well, I really like this exercise for this reasons, but I don't like it for these reasons. So how can we massage it to get these concepts across, but in a way that's going to be more beneficial to the student in the long run? And, just brainstorming all of those things. And I'll be honest about one that I did not like to start as an instructor. There was an exercise to teach. It was called Connect the Dots, I think. And it was a method of teaching loose leash walking. And I just didn't like it at all. And I did the exercise because I was following the rules, but I just didn't get it. And then at a faculty meeting, I got to see it demonstrated with, Karen Pryor and some other people who had been more familiar with the exercise to start. And we actually did it live together. And it just clicked for me. And I was like, oh, I totally didn't get, I was thinking the exercise was for the dog. It's not, it's for the handler. And it's brilliant training for the handler. And now when it comes time we get to that part of the program, and I'm like, okay, everybody buckle up because I'm going to tell you why this exercise is awesome. and it's fun because since I did have that experience of, I just don't feel comfortable with it. Then when I enthuse about it and I say, okay, I hated this when I first heard it, but this is why you're going to like it anyway. And I think it's easier for me to sound convincing when I can say, now that I understand it, I'm converted on this. And which really is how I was with clicker training in general, right? Like, if you had asked me, however many years before, about feeding a dog for behavior, I would have thought you were crazy. That's not what good trainers do. But here I am. So
interesting. What is a lesson there for everyone? Like, if you see
learning
something,
matters.
learning matters, or because like what kind of learning? Like, what in that situation was the lesson like you needed to see and have a different context to learn that thing?
Yeah, no, I think context was a big part of it. I would say, my flippant, sarcastic response of learning matters
I love your flippant, sarcastic response. Please keep it coming.
That's good because I don't think I can turn that off easily. But the idea there that first impressions are not necessarily our longest. First learning is important, but we can learn past that, right? So. I just was coming at it from the perspective of this is dog training. So we clearly are training the dog. And I don't see how this exercise is great to train the dog. And when I realized, no, this is not about training the dog. This is about breaking down criteria for the handler. This is about helping the handler to be more successful. And then naturally that will result in a better training for the dog. And then I was like, oh, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. And now I feel kind of silly for having resisted, but it's because, that wasn't clear to me when I started it. And first learning is definitely important, and first learning leaves a really deep impression, but we actually can keep learning past that first learning experience. And
in your experience of training, how many, you won't know the answer to this, just give a rough estimate or a ballpark figure, a rough ballpark figure. How many people do you think you've helped go through the KPA program?
Oh, it's somewhere in the 3 digits, but
in the 3 digits.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
No, it is. It's super cool.
Yeah.
It is super cool. I absolutely love it. Yeah.
And do you feel that you are unique in not seeing that learning exercise was about you as a learner? Is that something that you see others also kind of need to have that moment where it clicks for them that, oh, like I'm a learner too?
Yeah. Well, at this point, none of my students get the opportunity to not get that right away because I come in like a freight train, like, oh, this is it. I enthuse sometimes. That's a trait.
What do you mean?
But
by
no,
that?
I think I can be quite. Nobody has ever in the history of ever said, I wonder how Laura feels about this. Like that has never been a thing. So I'm over here like, let me tell you about this exercise. This is what we're going to do. It's going to look kind of weird, but just stay with me for a second because this is what it actually does. And look at how it has this effect. And isn't that the coolest thing? And so that's my natural, I don't need caffeine. That's how that works. But yeah, I think hopefully by the time we get to that point, I've done a good job of teaching that, dog training really is about training an entire team. And that my human learner is just as much my student as my canine learner. And so my job is to set people up that they're already receptive to that viewpoint as we get there. But that is, I don't know. It's just what we can always, even at that point, I was a professional trainer for a long time. I don't even know how many years, but, probably more than 10. I don't know. And yet, and it's like, on the one hand, you're like, ooh, 10 years, right? And on the other hand, you're like, but 10 years is quite enough time to settle into a rut. Okay? You can get into a really good rut in 10 years. And so being able to look at something and say, wow, here's a whole new perspective. I had not even considered this kind of approach, and I love it. And I think we just need to be open to that. We just need to stay open to that.
Well, that's an inspiring mindset to have. I feel like when you explain it, like one might look at it and say, well, that's simple, but like I don't feel like everyone kind of views life the same as that. I don't think everyone comes up against like a whole new way of looking at things and gets excited. So, I mean, I think some people feel vulnerable and scared in that moment.
I heard long ago, and I have no idea where I heard this, but I heard that a good instructor should always be taking classes in something they know nothing about. So they constantly have that, I'm a complete noob, I'm a rookie, I don't even understand the terminology here. And so it just keeps you aware of what that feels like. So, when I have my clients come in with their dogs who are, barking at other dogs or lunging at the kids or whatever, and they're not only unfamiliar, but they're already overwhelmed and already frustrated. Rather than being like, well, of course this is the result if you're going to do these behaviors which reinforce these behaviors, and all of this. Instead, I can recognize, this is actually what I felt like yesterday, and as I fell off the parkour trash can or whatever the case might be, and so I can be a little more able to relate to them and a little more approachable.
That's some really good advice. And what are you learning at the moment? Is this something that you're constantly intentionally including in your life, as like, let's learn about something new?
Yeah. So I'm actually taking 2 courses right now in online marketing. And yes, my brain is being stretched in ways that this is not my comfort zone. Let's just say that. And I'm getting better, but you want to talk about walking into a world full of new terminology and, the obvious, well, of course your cost per click is going to be affected by, well, I'm sorry, why would I know that? I didn't know what a CPC was 20 minutes ago, all of these things. And so, yeah, it's any of those things. It doesn't necessarily have to be something new in training. And in fact, I think it's probably good if it's not. It's just anything where I get to feel like, I am not the expert here, and that's good for us.
And how is your experience of marketing with your knowledge of behavior? Does that cross over? How are you finding that?
I think it does. And I think, like, on the one hand, when we start talking about, okay, we want to condition a customer to click on this thing, and then we're going to, once they've clicked on it, they'll be more likely to click on the next thing, and they'll be more like that. And I'm like, oh, behavioral momentum, is that what we're talking about? But then I have to be cautious not to be like, oh, now I've recognized a concept, so suddenly I know what I'm talking about, because Yeah, I probably don't yet, but it's fine to be able to grab onto those snippets and slot them into the framework of what I already know. So
that's a good example. I think it's probably one that, and I say good example because what I mean by that is many people in our audience probably are in the same boat as you, needing to learn about marketing. And while we're on the subject of different areas of our lives and how they intertwine, you are also an author and you write fantasy.
I do.
How do those two worlds? Obviously, they're one world, they're your life, but different parts of your life. How do they influence each other, if they do influence each other at all?
They do influence each other, and I don't know, like how. Like there's a lot of possible ways to answer the question. Sorry, I'm running through the filter system in my head really quickly. So in some areas, it's much more obvious than others. Like obviously the kids' book that you mentioned, about training mythical creatures. Okay, that's a pretty easy blend. You've got clicker training, you've got dragons. There we go. But in other areas, it has to do with, okay, well, how are these characters interacting? And I'll have a scene that an incredibly savvy behavior person will say, "Oh, I see some modification going on here," but the hopefully, I don't want it to obviously that shouldn't be what you're thinking about while you're reading a good story, right? That you should just get immersed in the characters and the drama and the plot. But I do have a fantastic time sneaking my day job into my fantasy. So I have. There's a story about a wildlife rehabilitator and a crow, and so that's got some training in it. There's a story. Actually, the story what prompted the kids' book about training the mythical creatures is, people had been saying to me for a while, "Okay, you've done these other books. When are you going to do a kids' book for clicker training?" And I kept saying, "Well, I don't actually know how to approach it. I feel like basics are basics, and do I just use smaller words? Like, what would I do with this?" But then I did a story. It was for an anthology about women and dragons. They wanted stories about women and dragons, and so I did a story about some wildlife researchers who are working with an endangered species of dragon and have to do some emergency dental care in the field and teach cooperative care. And it's an incredibly nerdy story for behavior people, but it's got dragons and political drama. So it's fun for non-behavior nerds as well. And so I actually posted about that story just on social media, just that I was writing it and that it had sold. And for whatever reason, I wrote my post not clearly, great thing for a writer to admit, right? I was unclear in my social media, and people wrote back thinking I was actually doing a training book for dragons. And I got so many comments on it. I was like, oh, well, obviously that could be a thing. And so I just turned that into the kids' book. And so that's where that came from. So yeah, it's one of those that there are a few places, like I have a relatively short novella called Bait that is, I say it's horror for behavior people. It's about, mermaids and training gone wrong and, all of these sorts of things. And so that's a lot of fun because it's 100% just, hey, behavior analysts, this is for you, right? But also horror. And then my primary stuff, it's not, you shouldn't be thinking about behavior modification while you're reading it. But if it's in there and you notice it, I'm okay with that. So
it sounds like a challenge. I find it hard not to put the behavior lens on something, but I find it really valuable to practice not putting the behavior lens on something. So it sounds like a good opportunity to practice those skills.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as an author, your number one job is good story. Like if I start getting on a soapbox in the middle of my story, then I'm doing it wrong. Like stories can have themes, but I shouldn't be lecturing the reader. And so I don't want to get too educational about this is why clicker training works great. But on the other hand, if you have a story where people do need to do emergency care on a dragon, and it happens to point out that reinforcement training is working better than trying to wrestle a dragon to the ground, that's fine. That's good. So.
And then how does writing help your training? And a logical answer I'm coming up to in my head, which might not be relevant at all, is creativity. It seems like it's such a creative endeavor, and creativity is so important to working with individual animals.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you an answer that's not at all scientific, not remotely scientific. So I am not prepared to defend this on any level, but my people approach writing in different ways, and mine very much involves feeding my subconscious a lot of sugar and then letting it tell me what the story is. So that's, I don't know if I can recommend that, as, it's the American diet could use a little benefit, a little cleaning up anyway, but there it is. But meaning that I am not a person who sits down and writes out an incredibly detailed outline of the story. I'm very much more an exploratory writer. And I do find that same thing happening with my training, where if I'm trying to think of a good example off the top of my head, which I'm not immediately coming up with one, but I'm in a situation with the client. We have a situation that, we've tried the first and most obvious approach and it's not working. And I will say, okay, well, for this next repetition, let's do this and let's set you here and we'll try this and then we'll see if this works for this reason. And I promise you, this sounds crazy, but it's true. On multiple occasions, I have heard words coming out of my mouth and consciously I'm thinking, who's talking? Like, that's a good idea. Whose was it? Okay. And it's not like I sat down, we talk about sitting down and writing a training plan. But what I've done is once that comes out, once it's been verbalized, I can immediately go, oh, this is why that's a good thing to try in this place. But if I just sat down and started listing out bullet points, I don't know that would have made it into the top 5. So I think on some level, it has allowed me to pull from that subconscious pool of knowledge a little more easily. And that's a good thing as long as my subconscious is feeding me the right things, which, hopefully by this point I've done enough practice that it's a fluent subconscious in the right things at this time. But yeah, that's, like I said, that's not remotely scientific. If somebody says they're not comfortable with that, I'm not even going to argue about it, but that is a thing that I have noticed. So
I feel like that's the potential in game, and not in game is horrible. Let's go with that for now. But like to have a subconscious that works for you because it's drawing from experience.
I think we actually just call that fluency. It's just a really ingrained fluency.
I love that.
It's just, yeah. But it's just one of those that to have that experience of I'm hearing myself talk and I'm like, that's a great idea, brain. Did you want to tell the rest of us before you said it out loud? Or are you just going to keep going and I'll nod along with it? It's, and I wish I could just think of an example, but under pressure, it's not going to come to me. But yes, on multiple occasions, I've just been like, oh, let's try this. And then I'll tell you why it was a good idea to try after I hear about it. So, yeah.
I like it. Hey, for those listening who might want to find out more about your books, get in touch with you, go visit your website, where would they go to online? How can they get in touch?
So for just strictly behavior things, it's Canines in Action. That is CANINESINACTION.com. And for things that are related to, my fiction writing, or if you want to buy books, because I can do bulk sales and whatever people need, that is Laura, VAB, that's VictorAlphaBravo.com.
Awesome. And we'll link to all of this in the show notes as well. We'll try to find a video of Tucker and share that in the show notes as well, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing everything so far. We love hearing about people's behavioral odysseys, as we like to call them. Moving forward, though, I want to build on the conversation that we've had thus far and get your perspective on an area of discussion that I would label a challenging one, a crucial one, in so much as frequently I find the 3 elements of a crucial conversation are present. Stakes can be high, emotions can run strong, and there can be differences of opinions. And this can be in conversations where we're advocating for positive reinforcement and less invasive methods with our learners, potentially though within the context of others using aversives. And so you've come up with 5 suggestions about how one might effectively operate within this context. Would you kindly share what you've come up with us?
Yeah, so I'm going to qualify just slightly in that, to me, the word suggestion implies here is a practical thing you can implement with actual behaviors. And at least a couple of these are concepts to keep in mind that hopefully will then influence my behavior. So I don't know if that falls under suggestion, but we're gonna include it under the general umbrella.
Well, I just want to reinforce that you took the opportunity to clarify to set us all up for success in receiving your suggestions / maybe not suggestions. So thank you for that.
The general thoughts from Laura to be applied as you will. Yeah, however you'd like to make them. So the first thing is just to think about that most people they really do want to do the best by their animals, and if they're engaging in a behavior that I don't actually like, they're probably acting in well-intentioned ignorance. So I'm just going to share an example that, immediately before we started our personal journeys of attempting to have this podcast recording, which, as you mentioned, was a bit exciting. But I just finished a session with a client, and we've been working for about 4 weeks now on, some interesting resource guarding and things going on. And we just today, she told me about some things they had been advised to do with their dog that I'm looking at this going, oh, now all this makes sense on where this particular behavior came from. And it just, hadn't been brought up before for any number of reasons, including feeling comfortable talking about it or whatever. Doesn't matter. But what we have here is a person who was doing what she was being told to do by people she thought she should listen to. And so and I told her, I'm like, you don't need to feel guilty about this. You did the best you had with what you had at the time. Now we're going to change the rules. We're going to do something else. So if they're acting in well-intentioned ignorance can be changed. We can teach from that. And yeah, there probably are a few people in the world who just really, really need a power trip, and they really like a particular approach because of how it makes them feel. You know what? There's specialists who deal with that kind of personality. That's not my job. I'm here to show people how positive reinforcement works. And the story that I tell, if I've got people who just can't, their life experience doesn't ever include something like that, so they can't wrap their heads around somebody ever having been wrong with good intentions. And I was in a facility where I was teaching, and a man and his wife came in with the dog, and the man had brought the wife and the dog in somewhat against her will to come and see a professional trainer who could explain to his wife why she needed to hit the dog. And of course I was like, can you tell me more about this request you have of me? And he was explaining that, when the dog pulled on the leash, he would hit the dog and the dog wouldn't pull for him, but the dog was pulling the wife and she wouldn't hit the dog. And this was why she was having problems. And would I, as a professional, just explain that he was right about this? And so I'm very diplomatically coming at, actually, I'm going to agree that it's not necessary. We can train the dog in another way. And you can absolutely get your dog to not pull on the leash, without hitting. And he looked at me, and it was like I had just told him that the sky was actually yellow or something completely. And he just stared at me, and his mouth kind of hung open, and he just, what other way is there? And it wasn't challenging. It wasn't aggressive. It was pure, what? It never entered his mind that there was another option. So, of course, you asked the question, brace yourself, Laura's turned on, right? And here it comes. But just the concept that, he could not fathom that there was any other way. So he needed a professional to back this. Not everybody's coming at this from, I want to be a dark lord of evil. Sometimes they're doing the best that they have been told. And that's where we are. So that was a really long point one. Sorry, I got on my soapbox. There we are.
I like it. Point one, not everyone wants to be a dark lord of evil. No, most people really want to do the best for their dogs. What happened after that? I mean, that is a situation that I feel a lot of people would potentially feel anxiety and like, oh my God, like what is being asked of me in this situation? I'm assuming there's other people around, there's people observing. Like,
oh yeah, and so the good news is, I mean, I wanted to get that conversation right. Obviously, like if you have somebody that you have temporarily shocked into receptive mode, go ahead and take advantage of it. They did not end up signing up for classes, but I feel like he did actually hear me and was not, I didn't get the, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to find another professional trainer who will back me on this. I think he legitimately went, oh my gosh, like I asked a professional, the professional said, there's another way. Maybe I don't know everything about this. Maybe the professional does know something, which is really gratifying. So yeah, and I have no idea because they didn't sign up for classes with me. I can't give you, and then they lived happily ever after to the end of that. But I can tell you, I feel like the conversation went well. So sometimes that's the best we can get. So
awesome. Well-intended ignorance, I think you framed that as. What's number two of your guidance? I can't remember what word you used.
I don't think I've used a word yet.
There is non-suggestions.
Yes, my nods. Well, this one actually is a little more of a suggestion. So here we go. This is more practical. And this is again goes back to, it's all about how we frame things in our head. It is not the animal I have to convince. And I say that in that way because so frequently, I'm seeing training that I'm personally uncomfortable with, and I want to get in and change the training that's going on. I want to get in there and I want to get the choke chain off the dog. I want to get, whatever the situation might be. But I haven't done anything. If I interrupt the behavior I don't like, I haven't done anything to change all the antecedents that lead up to that. I haven't done anything to offer different consequences to change that owner or handler's behavior. I've probably just built up some resentment against my position as I come bulldozing in with, you're doing it wrong. And obviously, like, let me say, if there are serious cases, if there is, danger to health and safety, serious distress, of course, obviously, we can step in. But even in those cases, if I want real change, I have to create change for the handler. So my job is to get reinforcement for that different behavior as fast as humanly possible. This might mean that I don't step in and be like, okay, this is how we train loose leash walking with a clicker, which is, guys, I love clicker training, but training loose leash walking is never the fastest thing you can train. Like that is a very complex behavior, and it takes a lot to be successful. And it's not the way people are going to immediately convert their training, because it's going to take them a while to see success with that. So I can either do something that is going to get them immediate positive reinforcement, or I can bank on a relationship that has enough trust in it to say the reinforcement is coming. But if it's a random stranger on the internet, I don't have that relationship. If it's a person on the first day of class, I don't have that relationship, right? So I need to do something that's going to get their reinforcement through the roof as fast as possible. And now they have reason to buy in and do my other stupid things that I want them to do. I can't answer any of these shortly. I'm sorry. I don't like short. These are. You say that again?
I don't like short.
Okay, good. That's because you got essays coming in here. So,
I mean, that's what we do with our dogs, right?
Exactly.
Do you feel that there's a disconnect between applying this to our clients sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to say, well, this is how I train the dogs, and then the humans are doing it wrong, right? And that's so easy, and it's because the dogs are mute, they are responding to stimuli, whereas the humans are articulate and therefore should know better. And I'm not pretending that I have the high ground on this, right? There are definitely times when I'm like, but you read the book, like, how are you not here yet? And but darn it, like sometimes it takes more than one exposure to create change, right? That's not unusual. We know this.
So a double-barreled question, or maybe just the same question asked in two different ways. Has this always been the way you've operated, or did this come to you over time? How did you learn to approximate, or what is the approximation for us to learn to approximate better for each other?
Yeah, and I'm just going to be real honest and say it's not always the way I operate now. Like there are definitely moments when I look over and I'm like, don't you know better than this? Okay, but the answer is, well, obviously not, or it wouldn't be happening. Okay, that doesn't mean I don't experience outrage or frustration or any of those things. It just means that in some situations I am better at bringing myself back and saying, okay, approach this as an instructor. How would you change this behavior? And in other arenas, that is not my knee-jerk response, and I am still working on that. So, it's just I'm not remotely going to pretend that I am the role model for this. I'm just pointing out that it's something we need to keep in mind.
So how I was going to keep digging here. How are you?
Okay.
How are you working on it? What are your antecedents? Do you think that leads up to you being what you might label as successful?
Oh, okay. So it's 2021. So we have just come through 2020, and I'm just going to be without getting political. I will say I've discovered in the last year of pandemic life that I am much more fluent at this technique or this approach in animal training, where I've been practicing it for a long time, than I am in social life, where I'm in the U.S. It's been quite dramatic here over the last year, and I see people posting something like, "Well, wearing masks causes your lungs to collapse," and I'm like, I have known you for how many years, and I know you are smarter than this. What are you doing? Okay, and so that is my knee-jerk response in that situation because I haven't practiced nearly so much there. And some days I'm better at stepping back than others. So let me just acknowledge that. But I think that's a fluency thing, and that is also an antecedent thing. I have some people who I thought I knew well who really, really, I'm going to say, disappointed me in 2020. There are things I did not expect, and there are relationships I grieve, and those emotions definitely play out in how I respond to things. So yeah, like that's behind me saying, I know I don't have the moral high ground on this, because that is not you will catch Laura at every situation making the correct choice here. That's not how that is. But it helps me a lot to say, okay, well, how can I look at this as behavior? What is driving, okay, this is a person who is experiencing an extinction burst. This is a person who is not able to obtain reinforcement in any way that they know how to do. Therefore, I'm seeing some really hopefully out of character, but also just, unwanted, undesirable behavior. So what can we do about that? And in some cases, they're on the internet. I can't do anything about that. Okay. But in some cases, I can make my own choices based on that information. I have no idea if that's where you were going with your questions, but that's where we ended up. So that's what you've got.
It reminds me of, I won't name the person, but they said to me once, I wish that sometimes my presenting self could talk to my wife self.
That is, yeah. I will say, like my wife self does pretty well. Like my husband and I, we've been married for, more than 20 years, and I can count our fights on my fingers. And I feel Like that is a place where I've internalized this pretty well. Social media is not that world. Okay. I'm just, it's absolutely like, it has everything to do with context, right? And it has everything to do with expectations. What are the antecedents? What have I been led to expect in this situation versus what is happening? And, I'm going to hit an extinction burst too. Am I self-aware enough to know when it is occurring? Okay. And do I recognize that this right here, this is redirected aggression? Okay. And I know what this is. I know how to find it. Do I recognize it before or after it comes out of my mouth? That kind of thing. And it's very much it's fluency building. It all comes back to fluency building. And there are people I know who are better at it in different spheres, and I have envy. but yeah, there it is.
Now, I mentioned crucial conversations before. Is that a text you've read?
I have not. I have listened to talks on it, but I have not actually read the book itself. So there's my confession for the day.
That's all right. The biggest thing they talk about, I feel, Ryan Cartledge's biggest takeaway is what you're talking about now, and that's to learn to look, like to learn to acknowledge when you feel unsafe, when your reinforcers shift in what you're trying to get out of an interaction and to make it safe.
Yeah.
That was ringing in my head as you were talking. And time-wise, let's get on to number 3. Hit us with it.
Okay, so number 3, I think we've hinted at, we haven't gotten to explicitly yet, which is that shaping is not failure. So we know, if I have a dog who's rage barking and is completely going bonkers at a window, and then we get down to just a couple of barks, we call that progress, right? But if I'm working with someone and they go from a lot of punishment to less punishment, we get angry because they're still using punishment. And I think we need to recognize that approximation is valuable, even more valuable in our human clients who can, choose to stop listening to me at any time. And there are plenty of other sources of information out there. So we need to reinforce that reduction of punishment. And sometimes, and here I'm going to say this is something that people need to find their own comfort level with, okay? I'm just going to say that I don't have an across-the-board moral problem with it, but sometimes using punishment in a lower level and more effective way to reduce the overall amount of punishment being used buys me the time to then get in and teach more positive reinforcement methods. And that is not me advocating, let's come in and solve things with punishment. That's me saying, if I have, I'll just give an example. I was working with some people who were using very hard corrections on prong collars. And these were pretty dramatic, collar corrections. And I have the skill with my horse background, and we would practice half halts on a rein. It was just a tiny finger movement on the rein. Like from the ground, you may not even see the hand move. From the ground, you shouldn't see the hand move. You may or not see a single finger flex. Very minor movements. And so I stepped in. I'm like, hey, let's try using half halts on the lead with these prong collars rather than double-armed collar pops. And it worked, okay? Because if you get the timing right, you can reduce that down. And so in the moment, the dogs have gone from receiving double-armed collar pops to finger flexes. So are we still technically doing punishment? Yes, we are, but we've made a world of difference for that dog in that moment. And now I have achieved some credibility on, look, I didn't jump down your throat. I did help you to change behavior. Would you like to listen to my next suggestion? Okay. And in that moment, the dogs are already in high arousal. The people are already in high arousal. I don't have the option to say, well, you know what, if we had done this 6 months ago, we could have gotten here. That's not really going to be a route to success. But if I can say, okay, let's try this. Let's get success. Great. Now do you want to move on to something you want to take my next suggestion. And I think that definitely had more positive outcome for that dog in that moment than if I just said, you're doing it wrong, right? Because at that point, dogs in high arousal, persons in high arousal, probably not going to achieve complete behavior change, okay? So that's celebrate approximations. Don't view approximations as failure. We celebrate approximations in the dog, but we're so reluctant to take them in the people. With people, we're very much like it's all or nothing.
I like
it's a good thing you told me you were okay with long answers, because that's how we are.
No, it reminds me a lot of, and I think these subjects, I mean, you did a great job once again of modeling for us, setting us up for success, and appreciating that you were getting into a vulnerable space, I feel, because these words are cues for some people to immediately do X amount of behaviors that aren't as receptive to learning. But it was reminding me a lot of stories that Ken Ramirez has shared about working in organizations where he might jump in and help them be successful at the things they were already doing to get the buy-in, which has really helped guide me in some of the work that I've done with organizations as well. So I'm grateful for hearing your perspective and experience there to hopefully help the listeners of this show. It makes a lot of sense to me. I like it, and I'm glad that we get an opportunity to share that in this episode.
Yeah, and I don't know, this is my own, here's my peeve. I'm going to pet it for just a second. But I think I was at an event. It was a multi-day event with a number of speakers. And one of the speakers explained something very similar to what we were just talking about, hey, this was a situation where, they were using punishment, and I helped them to do something in a different way that still technically is punishment, but way reduced. And then, this is buying in, to be able to move forward in a positive reinforcement way. And a person next to me said, just gleefully gasped and went, "Oh, that person's in violation of their code of ethics." Ha! And I was like, oh my gosh, have you been sitting here for 3 days waiting to catch something that you could pounce on? Like, the amount of just glee in this was, it was really disturbing. And I just kind of like removed myself, because I didn't really, sometimes you're not going to say a good answer. So, and I walked away like, oh my gosh, what I just heard was a success story. Okay. What I just heard was, you went into an organization that was very positive punishment based, and moved it to negative punishment and less negative punishment, and starting positive reinforcement. And what this person is, now I can say they're violating a code of ethics. And I'm just like, oh, we don't need to be like, let's not shoot our own soldiers here, right? Like, this is, we can do better than this. We can celebrate progress before it becomes an end goal. Like, progress is still progress. There's my little whine for the day.
Now you've given me an idea for a future question in our podcast show, and that is, imagine your peeve is in front of you. I'm going to give you permission to pat it for this next question.
There we go. Yes.
I love that. Number 4.
So another more practical application here. I do have a few, but this has to do with environmental setup. If I don't want a student or a peer or anyone to be using positive punishment, I should be doing everything I can to help reduce the behavior that they will feel obligated to punish. So, and sometimes this is just good classroom management. Like if I'm running a group class, I might have barriers to help reduce the dogs barking at each other, because that's going to cause the humans to feel anxious and embarrassed, and they're going to, want to punish the barking. It can be that if I'm meeting up with a trainer that, we're going to be training together, but I know this person uses more punishment than I do. I'm going to make sure to greet their dog in such a way that keeps their dog's feet on the ground, so the dog's not tempted to jump, so the person's not tempted to punish. I can do as much as I can to set that team up for success. One way to get rid of behavior is to reduce reinforcement for that behavior. And an easy way to reduce reinforcement is to make sure that it doesn't get a chance to occur. And that occurs on both ends of the leash. And so that's, I'm going to do a lot of, I really think that the difference between a good trainer and a great trainer, to use a extremely cliche phrase, but good trainers make good training decisions in that moment, and great trainers make great training decisions before the training starts. And environmental arrangement is so big, and we should take advantage of that when we're working with other trainers or people that we want to see behavior change in.
I love it. Great example. And I'm going to resist the temptation to invite more passion talking on number 4. In the interest of time, move on to number 5.
Number 5. Well, good news. Number 5 is the shortest one. Number 5 is shut up and show off. And that is, we can talk a lot, but really showing results is the very best way to get people interested. And the number of times I've had people say, "Wow, that's really cool. How did you get that?" Oh, now you've asked. Now you're much more invested than if I just walked up and said, "Do you know how to get behavior?" So, yeah, shut up and show off.
Like it. Number 1, most people really want, I'm reading what I've written here, which isn't number 1. Most people really want to do the best for their dogs, regardless of if we approve or not. Number 2 is not the animal that you have to convince. You have to work with the human end of the leash as well. Number 3, celebrate approximations. Shaping is not failure. Number 4, environmental arrangement. I love that you said, what was it? Good trainer is thinking of good decisions in the moment. A great trainer is thinking of good decisions before the moment arrives. And number 5 is shut up and show off. How did I go?
That's good. I like it. You covered the ground way faster than I did.
We only needed 2 minutes, Laura. No. You introduce yourself as a balance trainer when you are doing KPA workshops. Why is this important? Did I get that wrong?
I'm actually going to correct. I introduced myself as a crossover trainer.
Crossover trainer. Sorry, I don't know why I wrote balance trainer here. I forgive me. It was a
That's cool.
Why is it important for you to frame the start of your presentations with that information for your learners? I'm so sorry I said balance trainer. Anyway.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine.
No, it doesn't make any sense.
I'm not going to punish that. No, we're good. No. It's important to me because, one, I want to establish the concept that is okay. All are welcome here. I have seen, that, you used to use punishment, therefore you're not as, attitude from people. And that's just not going to happen in my classroom right from the start. Let's establish that. And 2, I think the more important reason is this is a safe place to ask questions. If you say, "Hey, this is what I was taught, this is what I have, this is why I believe this was true, and you're telling me to think something differently, let's talk." Yes, let's talk through that. Okay. Like, I'm never going to be upset at somebody asking how to understand better, right? Like that's, so I want to make sure that is a wide open thing. And it means too, that I'm going to understand when you are more fluent. When I stopped training with a choke chain and started training with a clicker, for a year, I did all of my training completely off leash because I couldn't control my arm movement. Okay. So it would reflexively pop that collar, but with no leash, there was nothing attached. It was just, an arm spasm that my dog could ignore. And I will absolutely understand if you are more fluent in the skills you practiced for longer than in your new clicker skills that are not as fluent yet for obvious reasons. And so if that's something that you're going to struggle with, this is a safe place to do it because I get it, because that was me. And so that's why I just want to set that tone up front, that, this is not an us versus them, okay? Because I was them. And now I'm here because people took the time to explain things to me. So that's the situation. That's where we are.
And this is the topic that we've chosen to talk about on this episode. how important is this conversation for us in 2021? I'm going to frame it as a breaking down of an us versus them wall.
Well,
Wrong question to ask at the end of the podcast episode.
I just can't think of any way to answer this question that's not going to come out sounding political. That's not my goal. This has been 2020, 2021, I think you could define as us versus them in so many arenas. And I think there are, a few cases where drawing lines is important. This is what I will and will not tolerate here. But there's also a lot of places where drawing lines does not help. Okay. And sometimes, sometimes I need to draw lines because of, my personal caretaking or or for health and safety reasons or whatever. And so, it's perfectly fine. I know trainers who say, I won't work with any student or I won't work with any client who doesn't come in wanting to use food because they're just not, equipped in even just on an emotional level. That's fine. That's their call to make to try to convince those clients. And I know other clients or other trainers, and I'm in this category that could shift where I'm like, hey, come at me. I'll talk you through it, and you'll end up using food because I'm going to explain why this matters. I'm going to bring you along here, but I don't need you to be at that point even to start. Okay, and sometimes it is fine to set your boundaries and what you are willing to deal with and not. But I think there's differences there to say, oh, this person's not using food or not using fill in whatever positive primary reinforcer you want to use, and therefore we can't associate with this trainer or something. And guys, if nobody had associated with me, if nobody had answered my dumb questions, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. And so I just don't feel that line drawing is always our best option. It's not that we can't ever have boundaries. Of course we can, but I think a lot of the us versus them is, it's more of a continuum than a hard, line anyway. And let's celebrate approximations. Let's make it possible for people to come over. If they've gotten nothing but punishment for using punishment, how likely are they going to be to walk in and say, hey, can I sit at your table now? It's not the fun place to hang out, right? So yeah, that's where I am.
Well, our last question is what you want to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years. You can say if you want. I just answered that, Ryan. But here's an opportunity to build upon all of the fantastic sharing and offering that you've brought to this episode today, and we're really grateful for that. Is there anything else that you really want to see in our industry and from our collective human race working with non-human learners moving forward over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, the good news is I've been around a while and I'm seeing it happen already, which is really, like I mentioned before, like now when I say, yeah, I started with keeler training and so many people are, what's that? And I'm like, oh, yay. Okay. And I think as more and more and more, we're seeing that positive reinforcement kinds of training are people's first experience, not what people are crossing over. And, I think that's fantastic. We just need to remember that's not everybody's first experience. They still can learn that. But, my goal is that we get to a point where people are like, choke chains, training collars. What is that? That's a crazy name. What is a training collar? How is that different than the collar? And so I'm delighted that we are already moving in that direction. But, just getting there on a universal level would be my personal happy place. But yeah, and I think just overall, training people the way we train our animal learners be good.
I love it. Thanks again so much for sharing that and for sharing everything else today, Laura. Before we officially wrap up, though, I know you've already mentioned it, but can you just remind everyone listening where they can go to get in touch and find out more about you online?
Right. I've got 2 websites. Either one you can email me through. The first is Canines in Action, spelled out CANINES. And the second is Laura, VAB, that's VictorAlphaBravo.com. Both of those are .com, if that wasn't clear.
And is there any preferred social media to follow you on? Are you active on social media?
I am active on social media. The websites do have links to where I'm active. I tend to show up on Facebook, on Twitter. I am to Instagram. I'll have a weekly Twitch stream, but that's much more about fiction, so I don't know that that's what people are into. But yeah, I'm around the interwebs. Say hello.
Wonderful. And we will, of course, link to all of that in the show notes as well. This has been so much fun. Laura, from myself and on behalf of everyone listening to this episode, we really appreciate everything you do and for taking the time to come and hang out with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.